The bells of St. Alders tolled with a kind of merciless precision, their echoes rippling through the grey London morning as if time itself were eager to witness the ruin of a young woman's heart. Beneath the cathedral's vaulted ribs of stone and gilded arches, guests rustled like a sea of silk and feathers. 1,000 whispers gathered in anticipation of a union that had been promised before either soul could spell the word love. Lady Evelina Harrow stood at the edge of the aisle, her breath trembling behind a lace veil. She had been raised for this moment, taught to bow, to glide, to conceal, yet now her knees trembled not from modesty but from the strange dawning knowledge that something was wrong. The Duke had not yet turned to her. Lord Sebastian Ravenshade, the man to whom her childhood had been quietly bartered, stood at the altar like a carved statue of authority and restraint. His hair, dark as crow feathers, caught the light of the stained-glass windows, scattering crimson and gold across the fine lines of his face. He was everything society admired and feared, titled, enigmatic, and unbearably composed. But as the murmurs swelled and the officiant's voice called for the bride, the Duke's eyes drifted past Evelina, past the trembling figure in white, and found her elder sister. Margaret. There was a flicker, a pause so fragile that even the organ faltered. Lady Margaret, resplendent in her lavender gown, stood near their mother, confusion dawning like a stain upon her composure. 1,000 faces turned. The Duke's expression did not change, only the angle of his gaze betrayed his betrayal. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding," whispered one of the guests, though none dared to breathe loudly enough to disturb the spectacle. Evelina's fingers tightened around her bouquet. The white roses, her mother's careful choice, began to tremble. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. All her life, she had been told that silence was grace, that a lady's virtue was proven by her restraint. Now, silence became her cage. The officiant hesitated. The crowd's murmur thickened, spreading like smoke. The Duke turned at last, not toward the trembling girl he had been promised, but toward the elder sister who looked ready to faint under the weight of 100 gazes. "Lady Margaret Harrow," said he, his voice smooth and resonant, "if you will grant me the honor of your hand." A gasp, sharp and collective, pierced the sanctity of the church. Somewhere in the back row, a fan snapped in two. Evelina could not move. Her vision swam with a blur of chandeliers and faces, painted faces, pitying faces, delighted faces. Her mother's voice rose in a strangled whisper, but it was drowned beneath the Duke's calm command. Margaret stammered something, a plea, perhaps a protest, but the Duke offered his hand, and like a frightened child guided by the laws of the world she feared to disobey, she placed her gloved fingers in his. The organ began again, though uncertainly, the music stumbling as though it, too, doubted the justice of the moment. Evelina's breath caught on the lace of her veil. Her heart, that obedient instrument of duty, began to revolt. She could feel the weight of every gaze upon her, some sympathetic, most entertained. "Poor thing," someone whispered. "She was always too meek. The elder suits the title." It was in that instant that she understood how swiftly love could become spectacle, how a promise, even one sealed by family and faith, could dissolve beneath the whim of power. The Duke did not look at her again. She should have wept. Instead, Evelina stood very still, her spine a fragile rod of glass, her lips pressed into a line of perfect civility. Her father's voice, long dead, long stern, echoed in her mind. A Harrow never breaks before witnesses. And so she did not. Not while the vows were spoken anew, not while Margaret's trembling "I do" echoed through the rafters, not even as the crowd rose to applaud a union built upon betrayal. Only when the bells rang again, their sound cruelly jubilant, did Evelina turn. Her veil caught on the stone floor, tearing slightly, a whisper of resistance. She walked down the long aisle she was meant to have claimed, her steps slow, deliberate, almost regal. The eyes followed her departure like vultures tracing a wounded creature, but she did not grant them the satisfaction of haste. Outside, the rain had begun. It fell in thin, silver threads, softening the edges of the world. The carriage that was meant to bear her to a new life stood waiting, its horses restless, its driver confused. Without a word, Evelina descended the steps, the sound of her heels swallowed by the downpour. The veil clung to her face, the fabric heavy with rain and humiliation. Through it, the cathedral loomed, a monstrous monument to all she had lost in the span of a single hour. A passerby paused to stare. She turned her face away. There was still pride beneath the wreckage. When she reached the carriage door, a voice, low, rich, unmistakable, cut through the rain. "Lady Evelina." She froze. The Duke stood at the top of the steps, his dark coat glistening, his expression unreadable. Margaret had fainted inside. Servants bustled around her. For one suspended moment, the noise of the world fell away. His gaze found hers through the rain. The distance between them was only a few yards, but it felt like the breadth of 2 lifetimes. She searched his face for cruelty, for mockery, anything to confirm the villain she needed him to be. Yet what she saw instead was something quieter, stranger. Regret. The kind of regret that no apology could cleanse. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet roses and candle wax. He spoke again, softer this time, as though to himself. It was never meant to be this way. Evelina said nothing. Words would have been too small, too mortal, to contain what now lived between them. Betrayal, bewilderment, the haunting recognition that love, once promised, had turned to ash. She stepped into the carriage, the door closing with a final, echoing click. As the horses began to move, she looked back only once. The Duke still stood there, motionless in the rain, his face pale against the gray sky. The cathedral bells tolled once more, each strike a wound reopening. And though she did not yet understand it, that sound, the toll of something sacred breaking, would follow her all her days. For even as she vanished into the mist of London's streets, the truth shimmered like a ghost behind her, that the cruelest betrayals do not end with the leaving, but with the looking back. Winter fell upon London like a silken shroud, muffling the city's restless noise beneath a hush of snow and rumor. The scandal of the Harrow wedding had not faded, it had merely changed costume. In drawing-rooms and parlors from Mayfair to Bloomsbury, her name had become both caution and entertainment. The jilted bride, they called her, spoken with either pity or delight, depending on the listener's appetite for cruelty. Lady Evelina Harrow had learned to move like a ghost among them. She attended no dinners, no operas, no morning visits. Her mother urged her to reclaim appearances, but appearances had already betrayed her. Instead, she spent her days in the south parlor of Harrow Hall, painting beside the window where frost bloomed like lace. The world outside was pale and watchful, and so was she. One afternoon, while the fire sputtered low and her brush moved without conviction across the canvas, a servant entered, hesitant, holding a small velvet box. "It was delivered for you, my lady," he murmured. No seal, no sender. Evelina opened it with the caution of someone accustomed to wounds in delicate wrapping. Inside lay a silver locket, oval and finely chased, engraved with the crest of the Ravenshades, a raven with a rose in its beak. Her breath caught. The same emblem had adorned the invitations to the wedding that never was. Inside the locket rested a single pressed violet and a folded scrap of parchment. For what was promised, not for what was taken, the note read in a hand she knew too well. The Duke's. The words pulsed in her palm like something alive. She should have burned it, thrown it into the fire and watched it curl into nothing. Instead, she slipped it into the drawer beside her paints, as if some part of her still believed that time might explain what it had so cruelly rewritten. By evening, London had learned of the locket. Gossip traveled faster than snowmelt. The Dowager Ashcombe whispered it to her cousin, who told a seamstress, who told half the city before nightfall. "A token from the Duke," they said. "Perhaps he regrets the elder sister. Perhaps there was love after all." Evelina did not confirm it, nor did she deny it. In her silence, society found its sport. The following week she was compelled, by her mother's insistence and her own sense of defiance, to attend Lady Vernon's winter masquerade. "You must be seen," her mother said, fastening the black velvet ribbon around her daughter's throat. "A scandal grows only in darkness." Harrow Hall's carriage arrived at the Vernon estate beneath a sky brittle with frost. The ballroom glowed with golden light, chandeliers blooming above like captive suns. Music floated through the air, strings and laughter weaving a tapestry of artful indifference. Faces hid behind jeweled masks, yet no disguise could conceal the glint of curiosity when Evelina entered. Whispers followed her. "There she is, poor girl, still beautiful even in disgrace." She carried herself with measured composure, her movements deliberate, as if each step were an act of quiet rebellion. The black silk of her gown shimmered faintly, its severity a shield against pity. She moved toward the gallery, seeking the anonymity of shadow. From there, she could see the dancers, faceless, graceful, merciless in their joy. A mask brushed her shoulder. A gloved hand steadied her arm. "Forgive me," came a voice, low, smooth, unmistakably familiar. She turned. The man before her wore a mask of silver filigree, but she would have known him in blindness. "Your Grace," she whispered, the words slipping out like breath on glass. The Duke inclined his head, his mouth curved with that same unreadable restraint she had once mistaken for nobility. "Lady Evelina," he said, so softly that only she could hear. "London is cruel. You should not have come." "Cruelty is not confined to London," she replied, her voice steady. "It sometimes wears a title." A brief silence passed between them, heavy as confession. He reached into his coat and withdrew something, a glove, she thought at first, until she saw the familiar glint of silver. "A second locket. I did not mean for the first to find you," he said. "But since it has, let it at least carry truth. What was done that day was not by choice." Her breath trembled. "And yet it was done." "Yes." His gaze lowered, then lifted again, searching her face as though memorizing what he had forfeited. "You were promised to me, Evelina. And I—" He stopped himself, swallowed the sentiment as if it were poison. "There are promises one makes to the living, and others one makes to the dying." "Dying," she repeated, but before he could answer, a voice called his name from across the room. His wife's voice, Lady Margaret Ravenshade, bright and brittle with pride. The crowd turned. The Duke's hand dropped to his side. His mask, his calm, his very posture reassembled in an instant. "Forgive me," he murmured again, bowing slightly. "Not all vows are spoken aloud, Lady Evelina." He was gone before she could draw another breath. The music swelled. Guests laughed. The world resumed its performance. But something inside Evelina shifted, not a break, not yet, but a crack through which light and anger began to mingle. She left the ball early, claiming fatigue, her mind echoing with that last phrase, "Not all vows are spoken aloud." The next morning, London awoke to a new scandal. A letter, unsigned but bearing the Ravenshade seal, had circulated among the ton. It hinted that the Duke's marriage had been one of convenience, arranged to settle a debt owed to the Harrow estate, and that his true affection lay elsewhere. By noon, the letter was everywhere, on dressing tables, in clubs, whispered over tea. Some said Evelina had written it. Others claimed the Duke himself had planted it to justify his actions. Truth, as always, was irrelevant. Rumor had already decided what to believe. At Harrow Hall, her mother wept in fury. "You will be ruined twice over if this continues," she cried. "Do you not see what they think of you?" "I no longer care what they think," Evelina answered, though the lie stung her tongue. She had not written the letter, yet its existence made her pulse quicken with a forbidden thrill. For the first time, the world's cruelty no longer rendered her powerless. It trembled, ever so slightly, before her silence. That night, she returned to her room and opened the drawer where the first locket lay. The fire flickered, reflecting in the polished silver, twin flames burning where her reflection should have been. She held it tightly, pressing it to her heart as though it could speak the words he had withheld. Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the city in false innocence. Somewhere in the dark, a carriage rolled to a stop before Harrow Hall. Its crest bore the same raven and rose. She did not yet know he had come again, but the sound of wheels on frozen stone made her rise, trembling, as though her heart had recognized him before her mind dared to believe it. The carriage that halted before Harrow Hall carried no crest upon its door that night. Yet Evelina knew who had come even before the servant's knock. The air itself seemed to tense, drawing its breath with hers. Outside, snow fell thick as silence, muting the world in a hush fit for secrets. When she entered the drawing-room, he was already there. The Duke stood by the fire, his coat dusted with melting flakes, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. He turned only when she spoke. "Your Grace," she said quietly, the title tasting colder than the winter air that had followed him in. London sleeps. What brings you here, at such an hour? He removed his gloves, slowly, as though unwrapping the very reason for his visit. A promise, perhaps, or the memory of one. Her pulse betrayed her calm. If you seek forgiveness, I am ill-suited to give it. I seek only truth, he replied. The firelight caught in his eyes, turning them to liquid amber. I owe you that much, and more. Evelina's fingers trembled where they rested upon the edge of the piano. The locket still lay at her throat, hidden beneath the folds of her gown. Truth, she repeated. It arrives rather late, Your Grace. He looked toward the flames, the muscles of his jaw tightening against the weight of confession. My marriage was a negotiation, not a choice. You were promised to me before either of us understood what such words meant. But when your father fell ill, debts followed, debts I could not ignore if I was to preserve my own house. The Harrows held the means to restore what mine had lost. Your sister's dowry, not your heart, was the price of that salvation. Her breath stilled. The fire crackled softly, filling the space where her dignity fought to breathe. So I was traded for solvency. And when the accounts were settled, you turned to the richer sister. No, his voice fractured the calm like thunder disguised as sorrow. Do not think it was greed. It was compulsion. Your mother demanded it. She knew the extent of the ruin, knew that only Margaret's inheritance could redeem both families. She asked it of me as a duty. And he faltered. I agreed. Not out of affection, but fear of dishonor. Evelina let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. You dishonored us all the same, she said softly. And fear is no virtue. He met her gaze then, stripped of every defense. I know. I have lived with the echo of that truth every day since. Margaret's kindness was her disguise. She knew, even as vows were spoken, that I looked elsewhere when I closed my eyes. A shadow passed through Evelina's expression. Pain, then disbelief. You cannot expect me to pity you. I expect nothing, he said, stepping closer. I came to return what I stole. From his coat he withdrew a folded letter, sealed with black wax. He held it out, his hand trembling faintly. She is ill, Evelina. Gravely so. The physicians say her time is near. She has written to you, begging your forgiveness. The words hollowed her chest. She took the letter, the paper cool against her skin. For a moment she could not move, could not speak. Margaret's handwriting, delicate and looping, stared up at her like a ghost of sisterhood once whole. Why bring this yourself? She asked. Surely there are servants for such errands. Because she asked me to, he replied. And because, though it shames me to admit it, I could not refuse the chance to see you again. Her composure wavered. And what of your vows? They were spoken to duty, he said, his voice barely above the whisper of the fire. Not to love. The truth hung between them, fragile and enormous. Evelina looked at him then as if for the first time, not the figure of cruelty that gossip had painted, but a man carved by remorse. And yet remorse, she knew, was a poor substitute for redemption. Still, her voice softened. If you came seeking absolution, I do not hold it. My forgiveness would mean little beside your wife's suffering. He stepped nearer, until the scent of rain and cold air mingled with the faint sweetness of her perfume. Then grant me this, he said quietly. Come to her. She wishes to see you once more before. His voice caught. Before the end. Evelina hesitated. Memories surged. Childhood laughter shared with Margaret in sunlit gardens, ribbons exchanged, secrets whispered beneath canopies of spring blossom. The wound between them had festered for years, yet blood still remembered kinship. At last she nodded. I will come. For her. He exhaled as though he had been holding his breath since that day in the cathedral. Tomorrow, then. The carriage will be sent at dawn. Their eyes met across the firelight, hers weary, his haunted. And in that fragile silence, something passed that words could never reclaim. the recognition that love had existed between them, not as a blessing, but as a ruin neither could escape. When the dawn came pale and thin, Evelina kept her word. The journey to Ravenshade Manor wound through frost-draped fields and forests heavy with stillness. By the time she arrived, daylight had softened into fog. The manor loomed ahead, gray stone against gray sky, its windows glowing like weary eyes. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and medicine. Margaret lay upon a chaise, her beauty dimmed to translucence. When she saw Evelina, her eyes filled with tears. "Sister," she whispered, her voice a ghost of its former grace. "I feared you would not come." Evelina knelt beside her, taking her frail hand. "I could not refuse you," she said. "Not now." Margaret's smile trembled. "You must believe me. I never wished for what happened. I was told he loved you, but that you were too young, too fragile, and that duty required otherwise. I thought I could make peace with that lie." Evelina squeezed her hand gently. "You need not explain. What is done cannot be unmade." Tears slipped down Margaret's cheeks. "He looks for you still, even when I sleep beside him. Forgive him, if not for his sake, then for mine." Evelina's throat tightened. She could not answer. Only when Margaret's eyes fluttered closed did she realize the Duke had entered quietly behind them. His expression was unreadable, some mixture of sorrow, relief, and reverence. "She sleeps," he murmured. Evelina rose, her composure faltering at last. "You should be with her." "I am," he said, "even when I stand elsewhere." Their gazes locked, the silence heavy with unspoken confession. "If time were kind, my lady," he said softly, "it would have allowed me to love you first." Evelina's eyes glistened, but her voice was steady. "Time has never been kind to women, Your Grace." He reached for her hand, hesitated, then let it fall away. "Leave before the house remembers who you are." She turned to go, but as she stepped into the corridor, she heard him whisper behind her, barely audible, almost a prayer. "Forgive me, Evelina, before the snow melts." The night unfurled beneath a storm that seemed to have torn through the heavens for their sins alone. The manor, with its tall, candlelit windows, stood like a ship caught in tempestuous seas, trembling beneath the thunder's growl. Inside, every corridor whispered with the tension of what could no longer be denied. Eleanor descended the staircase slowly, her pale hands clasping the banister, her breath trembling with purpose and fear. The ivory gown she wore, the same she had been meant to wed him in, floated behind her like a ghost of vows never spoken. The music from the ballroom below had faltered. Polite society had found new amusement in the scandal of the hour. The Duke of Ravenshade had arrived without his bride. He stood by the great hearth when she entered, tall, still, a portrait of power wrapped in a black coat soaked from the rain. His dark hair fell damp against his brow, and the firelight drew sharp, golden lines across his face. For once, he did not wear arrogance as armor. There was something fractured in his gaze, something that spoke of regret long denied. When their eyes met, the noise of the house faded, replaced by the sound of her heart drumming against her ribs. "My lord," she said, the title catching like thorns in her throat. "I did not think you would dare come here again." His lips curved, not in amusement, but in sorrow. "And yet, here I stand, drawn to the very place I swore never to return." Eleanor's breath hitched. "To mock me once more?" "No," he said softly. "To atone." Thunder cracked outside, the sound echoing through the marble floor. A few guests lingered at the edge of the ballroom, pretending not to watch, their curiosity sharper than knives. Eleanor felt their eyes upon her, the scorn of those who believed her ruined, pitiful, forgotten. She lifted her chin. "You made a spectacle of me, my lord. You left me standing before a congregation, a bride without a groom, a promise turned to public shame." His voice dropped low. "You think I wished for that? I think you chose it." He closed the distance between them, the air thickening with unspoken memory. "I chose ruin, Eleanor, mine as much as yours. Do you imagine I married your sister out of desire? It was punishment. For her. For myself. For daring to want what I was told I could never have. The words seemed to still the air between them. Eleanor felt the walls closing in, the chandeliers, the scent of rain and fire, the heartbeat of every secret she had tried to bury. "And what was that, Your Grace?" she whispered. "You," he said, with the desperation of a man confessing in his final hour. "You were the sin I could not unlearn." Her breath broke, a shiver trailing down her spine. "You call it sin. I called it love." He exhaled sharply, as though the word itself were too sacred to bear. "Then I was too much a coward to name it as such." She turned away, her eyes glistening. "And my sister?" "She was innocent in this," he said. "But she knew. From the moment I saw you at that cursed engagement ball, the way the world fell silent when you looked my way, she knew she could never hold what was never hers." Eleanor's voice trembled. "Yet she wore the veil." "Because I let her," he said bitterly. "Because I thought denying you would preserve us all. Instead, it destroyed everything." For a moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled, a single log collapsing into embers. The soft murmur of gossip beyond the doorway grew fainter, as though even the world itself were holding its breath. Eleanor turned to face him fully now, her composure splintering. "Why have you come? To seek forgiveness." He took another step, close enough that the rain on his coat brushed her sleeve. "No. To beg for one last chance to make right what I shattered. I would cast away title, wealth, every cursed stone of Ravenshade if it meant earning your mercy." Her eyes searched his face, the proud lines softened by remorse, the storm in his expression no longer cruel but human. "And if mercy is not mine to give, then let my repentance be eternal," he whispered. The sincerity in his tone struck something within her long thought dead. Yet she could not surrender so easily to the tide that had once drowned her. "You speak as though words could mend what the world has already witnessed," she said. "My name lies in ashes, my heart in ruin, and yet you stand before me asking for what cannot be undone." He reached into his coat then, producing a small velvet box, the same she had once held on the eve of their wedding, returned unopened after his betrayal. He opened it slowly. Inside, the ring gleamed, still as pristine as that night, untouched by time. "I kept it," he said, his voice barely audible. "Every night, I would open this box and imagine the hand it was meant for. Not hers. Yours." Her gaze fell upon the ring, a token of what might have been. The diamond caught the firelight and cast a trembling glimmer across her eyes. "You wound me with memory," she murmured. "I would rather wound you with truth," he replied. "For I am a man undone by it." A silence stretched, heavy, fragile, filled with the ache of everything lost. Eleanor's hands quivered, but she did not take the ring. "I cannot be your redemption, my lord," she said. "Not when I have yet to find my own." His jaw tightened, but his eyes softened, as though her refusal were the only mercy he deserved. "Then let me at least bear the weight of what I've done." She stepped closer, one heartbeat away, her voice a whisper barely carried by the crackle of the hearth. "Tell me this, before you leave. Did you ever truly love her?" He shook his head slowly. "No. I loved only what I could not have, and in the end, that was you." Her tears fell then, not of despair, but release. "Then perhaps that is punishment enough." A gust of wind burst the doors open, scattering petals from the hall's abandoned bouquets. The candles flickered wildly, as if the world itself trembled at their truth. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away, not in anger but in quiet resolve. "Go," she said softly, "before I forget that I once hated you." His lips parted, but no words came. He bowed, deeply, reverently, and when he rose, his eyes glimmered with both grief and devotion. As he turned to leave, Eleanor's gaze fell once more upon the ring in his hand, the circle of promise broken and remade in fire. Outside, the storm began to fade, but the echo of his footsteps lingered long after he was gone. And somewhere within her chest, beneath the ruin and pride, something fragile began to stir, a single, trembling question of what redemption might yet mean. The years that followed his departure were not kind, nor cruel, they were merely quiet. The once glorious halls of Ravenshade stood in mourning, their chandeliers dulled by dust, their mirrors reflecting the emptiness of a house without laughter. Yet within that silence, Eleanor found the strength she once thought forever lost. She became mistress of her own estate, her name whispered again at gatherings, this time not as a fallen bride, but as a woman of unshakable dignity. Still, on certain nights, when the fire dimmed and rain traced the windows, she would think of him, the cruel duke who had broken her heart only to teach her its worth. She never spoke his name, but she carried the echo of his voice in the soft stillness between breaths. It was on such a night, 5 winters later, that fate stirred once more. A carriage arrived unannounced, its wheels crunching through frost. The hour was late, the sky heavy with snow, and the servants, bewildered, rushed to the door. From within the fog stepped a figure cloaked in black, his movements unsteady, his breath visible in the cold. Eleanor descended from the upper hall, a candle trembling in her grasp. The flame illuminated the man who now knelt before her threshold, a man aged not by years but by remorse. The Duke of Ravenshade, gaunt and pale, looked up at her as though beholding salvation. "Eleanor," he whispered, her name breaking like glass on his tongue. She froze, her heart thundering as memory and present collided. "My lord," she said softly, her tone calm yet lined with disbelief. "Why are you here?" His cloak fell aside, revealing the bandages around his shoulder, the tremor in his hands. "Because time," he rasped, "is a thief that leaves no soul unpunished. I come not as the duke you once despised, but as a man dying of his own regrets." She stepped closer, the candlelight bathing his face. The arrogance that once marked him was gone, replaced by a weary tenderness. "You should not have come," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "I had to," he murmured. "Your sister, my wife, she is gone." The words struck her like a chill wind. "Gone." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "Fever took her 3 months past. I buried her beneath the old willow at Ravenshade." Eleanor's breath caught. For a moment, neither spoke, and only the storm filled the space between them. Then, with quiet grace, she gestured toward the fire. "Come inside, my lord. You should not stand in the cold." He obeyed, though his strength faltered. She guided him gently to the hearth, her hands trembling when they brushed his. He sank into the chair, his gaze fixed on the flames. "I came to return something," he said, reaching into his coat. From within, he drew the same velvet box, the ring, now tarnished with time. She stared at it, her pulse quickening. "You kept it still?" "I could not cast away what never ceased to haunt me," he said. "I lived in the shadow of a vow I never fulfilled." Eleanor lowered her eyes. "And now?" "Now," he said, "I seek no forgiveness, only peace. If you cannot grant it, then at least let me die knowing I have seen your face once more." His words struck deep, stirring emotions she had spent years mastering. "Do not speak of death," she said, though her throat tightened. He smiled faintly, his eyes dimming. "It has been near me for months. I have made my peace with it. But I could not leave without telling you one final truth." She turned toward him, her voice trembling. "And what truth is that?" "That love," he said slowly, "is not the sin I once feared, it is the penance I was meant to serve." The fire crackled. Snow pressed against the windows like 1,000 whispered confessions. She felt the room tilt, the air thicken with unspoken history. "I should hate you," she whispered. "Then hate me," he said, his voice faint but sure. "But let your hatred know that it was born from love." She closed her eyes, tears glistening in the candlelight. "You wronged me beyond repair." "I did," he agreed. "And yet, I never ceased to pray that you found happiness without me." Her hand brushed his cheek, an act neither tender nor cruel, but human. His breath hitched, as though the touch itself redeemed him. "You never truly knew what happiness meant," she said softly. He looked at her with a kind of peace that broke her heart. "I know it now," he whispered. "It is this moment. Here. With you." The candlelight flickered, casting them in gold and shadow. She wanted to speak, to reach for him, but the words tangled in grief. "I wish," he murmured, "that we might begin again, somewhere beyond time and title." Eleanor's tears fell freely now. "Then go to that place, my lord," she said, "and wait for me there." His lips curved in a faint smile. "Always." And with that, he exhaled, a single, quiet surrender. His eyes drifted closed, the faintest trace of warmth lingering on his skin. She remained beside him long after the fire dimmed, her hand resting upon his. When dawn came, the storm had passed. Snow blanketed the earth in silence. Ravenshade's bell tolled once, then fell still. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor returned to the estate he had left her in his will. She wandered the gardens alone, her steps soft on the frosted path. Beneath the willow where his wife slept, she placed the velvet box beside the roots and whispered, "Rest, both of you. The world will remember." Years passed. Seasons turned. Visitors spoke of the Duchess of Ravensshade, the woman who restored the house to grace, who opened its doors to the poor, and who never remarried. They said she often stood by the window at dusk, gazing toward the horizon as though expecting someone from beyond the mist. And perhaps she was. For on certain evenings, when the wind carried the scent of rain and roses, the candles in her chamber would flicker, and the old clock would pause, just for a breath, before ticking again. On the night she died, the servants swore they heard music echoing through the corridors, soft, distant, like a waltz once unfinished. And in the morning, they found her seated by the window, her hands folded around a tarnished ring. Her face, serene and faintly smiling, was turned toward the light. The legend endured. They said the cruel duke and the betrayed bride had found one another at last, not in this world of pride and punishment, but in some gentler place where vows once broken could finally be kept. And when the wind rustled the willows at Ravensshade, it carried their names together, as if love itself had written them into eternity.